Hello again, I'm here with you in the second session of Pro Modeling course. In this session, I want to talk about the rest of the toolbars. I hope that you have practiced the lessons of the previous session. You have to take it seriously from the beginning. The first and second sessions may be easy for some of you if you have worked with 3DSMAX before. Of course, it doesn't seem logical for someone to learn primary shapes, which makes modeling harder, while they know editable poly method. But you have to know that the purpose of the first and the second sessions is to become advanced in controlling the viewports, using shortcut keys, and your accuracy in placing shapes together. I hope that you have already become capable of using shortcut keys and controlling the viewports easily, which we talked about in previous session. Let's go to the toolbars. Last session we talked about them up to select and place button. This session we are going to talk about the rest of them and also some of the modifiers. Now we go to RCS part, or Reference Coordinate System. I create a shape here. Now I rotate it this way. Now I want to create another shape on this surface. As you remember, we have talked about AutoGrid in previous session. By activating it, you could create your new shape on any surface you want. Now, if you want to move your shape in this direction, you would fail, as you can see. If you want to make copies of this shape in this direction, you have to use this reference section. You have to select local from this part. The RCS section is for this purpose. You can change the direction of your gizmo from this part. So I select local from here. And now by holding shift, I can make as many copies as I want precisely. As you can see, it's completely straight. If I had selected another mode, it wouldn't be precise. Now, if I put this shape perpendicular, for example, I want to use it for modeling some stairs. Now, here we can't use local mode. Local is according to the shape's direction, and because we selected AutoGrid for creating this shape, these two shapes' directions was the same, and we could create our model precisely by selecting the local mode. But now, even if I select local mode, I can't reach my goal. And it's really hard to be precise in this way. For this, I can select Pick. You have to select your shape first, and then select Pick, and click on the second shape. This way it changes the coordinates of the first shape to the coordinates of the second shape. As you can see, its name is added here. Now I can make copies of my shape in this direction precisely. Now it's so precise and accurate. The most usable modes in this section are local and Pick. But we can use its other modes too. We usually use View. A screen shows the gizmo according to your view. When I change my view, it changes too. Grid sets the gizmo according to grids. we can use this part and this part together. Let me tell you about this part first. The use pivot point center is usable for us when we have several selections. For example, I copy this box and make 4 boxes. And now I rotate them this way. When I rotate these shapes, it applies from the center of total selections. It's because the default is on use selections center. But if I change it and select use pivot point center, it sets the coordinates of every shape on the center of the shape itself. So if you rotate all of them together, every one of them will rotate from its own center. And the third mode rotates the shapes according to the reference one. Use transform coordinate center. We can select our reference here. For example, if we select working, they will rotate like this. Or the screen mode would be according to our view. And another parts that we have here, like peak and etc. Local is the same as the first mode, which lets you rotate the shapes from their own center. You can use the combination of these two parts. I will tell you about the usage of their different parts later after talking about the angles. I will give you an example to comprehend it better. The next part in the toolbar is select and manipulate, which doesn't have any usage for us. Let me change this back to the default setting. You don't have access to this mode for this shape. As you can see, nothing happens. But in the shapes that have radius, by clicking on manipulate, a line appears around the shape, which gives us the size of the radius. It just has this usage, which we don't use. You can use it to measure the size of the radius, which is also available here in the parameters of the shape, unless you have already converted the shape to editable poly, which in this situation you can't figure out the size of the radius with any of these two methods. The only way is to use the measure part to find out about its x, y, and z dimensions, but not its radius. So you'd better determine its radius first and then convert it to editable poly. I will try to talk less about the unnecessary parts like this, and instead of that talk about the more important parts. The next part is the keyboard shortcut button. If you right click on this part, this window appears. Under the keyboard tab in category part, you can assign shortcut keys to different commands. For example, in edit part, we have different commands like align or array, which in the default array doesn't have a shortcut key, but we can assign a shortcut key to it. For example, Ctrl plus Shift plus F. The reason I select 3 keys for this command is that I don't want them to be the hotkeys of another command. So I choose the hotkeys for this part, and here in this part it tells us that it's not assigned to another command. So I click on assign, and now by pressing Ctrl plus Shift plus F, the array command will apply. So you can assign a shortcut key to any of your commands from this part. But don't change its default shortcut keys. But if, for example, you have assigned a lot of keys to different commands, or maybe you've made changes in other tabs and now you want to change your computer or laptop, you can save them from here, and by clicking on Load button, you can apply them to your new computer or laptop. In this tab, you can make changes to your mouse, just like the things I told you about keyboard. In Toolbars tab, you can add new commands to your toolbar, this part. You just have to select the category you want from category menu, for example, edit. And now you can select the command you want and drag it to the main toolbar. Now, as you can see, arrow is added here and you can use it. You can also delete the buttons you don't want. You just have to right click on the button and click on delete. Or you can edit some parts of it this way. The next part is quads. In this part, you can add new commands to your right-click menu. We have different commands here, for example, clone. Now we want to add array command next to the clone, for example, this way. Now, as you can see, it's added here. And for deleting it, you can do this. Now it's deleted. And in this part, you can make changes to the menus. You can add or remove them. Here you can make changes to the Max theme color, which we don't have anything to do with it. The next part, which is important, is snaps. It helps us a lot in controlling and placing the objects. If you have practiced last session's lessons, you might have found it hard to place objects. For example, you want to snap this shape to this one. It's hard and it won't be precise. If you zoom in, you can see that they are not exactly tangled together. For doing it precisely, we can use the snaps toggle. Its shortcut key is S. By right-clicking on this button, you can determine the spot you want absorption to happen. For example, you can select vertex if you want to snap two vertices together, and you can do it while a snaps toggle is activated. Now, as you can see, this method is so precise. You can place your objects in the exact place you want. The parts that are more important for us are vertex, edge segment, which snaps lines together, and grid points, which are helper points that we can use. These three parts are the most important parts in a snaps toggle. But you may sometimes need some other parts too. Center of the line, end of the line, some parts that are more usable for 2D shapes, and etc. And you can also use this part for some purposes. An important part in snaps is enable axis constraints. Let me just select vertex. When you want to snap a shape to another one, if your axis is locked in one direction, you can't do it. The reason is this part. enable axis constraints. The shortcut key for this part is Alt plus D. You can lock your axis in one direction by enabling this part. You just have to click on your required axis. Their shortcut keys are F5, F6, F7 and F8. F8 is for selecting all axes together. Right now it's locked on one axis. You can align it with other shapes when you want. Now they are aligned in this part or this part. But if you don't want to align them in one axis, you have to press Ctrl plus D. You can do it while you are holding the left click. It's not locked on one axis anymore and you can move your shape in any direction you want. As you can see, now I snapped them together precisely. This is an important part in snaps which you can use. Most of the time that students have problem in this part is because of this. Another important part here is a snap preview radius. When you want to snap two shapes together, as you can see, when the selected shape gets close to the other one, a plus icon appears. We call this space a snap preview radius, which is under General section. Then when it gets closer, the attraction occurs. We call this space the snap radius. It is the space attraction occurs after the shape passes it. You can control them from here. For example, I set them on 300 and 100 pixels. Now, when it gets to 300 pixels from the other shape, the plus icon appears. Now when I bring it closer, as soon as it gets to 100 pixels from the other shape, the attraction happens and it sticks to the other shape. So you can determine the sensitivity as you like. Another part that we have here under the marker section is display. You determine the size of the plus icon from this part. If I increase this number, as you can see, the plus icon gets bigger, which usually is not necessary. Maybe just a little bit is okay. So, we almost talked about all the parts under the Option tab. But just let me tell you about this part. Display rubber band. The rubber band is this green line that appears when you drag a shape to snap it to another shape. If you deselect this part, you won't see the green line anymore. It doesn't have any special usage. I just wanted you to know about this part because this is our Pro Modeling learning course and it has to be complete. And the rest that we didn't talk about are angle and percent, which we will talk about them. But let's talk about the snap to frozen objects. Now it doesn't show anything. You use it when you want to snap your shape to a frozen object. You may sometimes need to snap your shape to a frozen object. You can do it while this part is selected. But if you don't want it to recognize the frozen objects and ignores them, you have to deselect this part. Now, as you can see, it doesn't recognize the frozen object anymore and you can't snap them together. Now, let's go to the angle part, which is a very important part. When you want to rotate an object, and let me reset the scene. For example, we have this shape here. I want to rotate it from this view this way. As you see, when I rotate the shape, I can determine a certain angle for it. I can't adjust it exactly straight, it's really hard. But in the first place, before you rotate the shape, you can activate Angle Snap Toggle by clicking on it, and now you can rotate this shape with a certain angle you have determined. As you can see, it changes on the amount of every 5 degrees, 75, 80, and so on. It's so precise. And you can change the angle from this part, for example, 45. Now I can rotate this object on increments of 45 degrees. Now, before going to the next part, the %snap toggle. I want to give you an example using some of the parts that we have already talked about. For example, you want to create a table. I create a cylinder. Let me go to a proper view, for example, top. You can increase its size to have a smooth shape. I'd better use a chamfer cylinder. I assign an amount of fillet for my shape and increase the number of its sides. And this way I increase the fillet segments to have smoother edges. Now I go to another view like top. I want to create a cylinder here. I create it in the proper position, and by switching to the front view, I adjust its height. Now we have created one of its legs. Now let's see how can we copy this one to create the other legs. First, you have to select it and make sure the angle snap toggle is on. But before that, let's see what happens if we want to create the other legs manually. You have to copy them one by one, and as you can see, it won't be precise, neither the distance nor their position. And it's also hard and takes a lot of time. So let's use another method. Go through the RCS part and select Pick. Then click on this cylinder. Now as you can see, its name is added here. And now from this part, use Pivot Point Center. You have to select the third mode. In this mode, it uses the Transform Coordinate Center, which is the cylinder center. Now when you rotate it, it rotates around this cylinder. Be careful to set the first leg in the right position. Now I have to set the angle. Right now it's 45 degrees. You can determine the number of copies you need by dividing 360 into the degrees you've set. Now that the degree I've set is 45, I can have 8 legs. As I have already one of the legs, I need 7 extra legs. So I set the number on 7. Now as you can see, all of the legs are created in even distances from each other this way. It's a very good and useful method for circular shapes to have precise rotation around them. The next part we want to talk about is the %snap toggle. By activating this part, you can scale your objects in a certain amount. I activate it and right click on it. Now in this part I enter the number I want, for example 100. The number we have here is 9. Now if I scale it, it gets 2 times bigger. You can scale your shapes as much as you want according to the percent you have determined. It just gets 2 times bigger every time, and it's all 3 dimensions. You may sometimes import a file with wrong scales, for example, from AutoCAD. From this part, you can adjust the scales, although in the following, when we talk about coordinates, you will learn better approaches. Next part, the edit name selection sets. This part saves our selections. Let me undo. Now I want to save my selections. I select the shapes I want. Now from this part I can give it a name. For example, W1. Enter. And now I select these shapes, W2 for example. And now my selections are saved with specific names, and I can reselect them by clicking on their names. It doesn't depend on their position, just the selections are saved. Although I moved it, I can still select them by the saved name. This part is different from attach, which we will talk about it in next session, or the group part, which makes them like a package. When you group some shapes, it puts them together like a kind of package. By clicking on any of them, they all get selected and they just move together, and it has a name here. And you can ungroup them by clicking on Ungroup button. So in this part, you can just save your selections, and you still are able to edit them. For example, you can add or remove some of the shapes. In my opinion, it's a useful part. For example, in heavy projects, you need to edit some parts again and again. For example, sometimes you need to make changes to some of the windows in different phases, or in completed modelings you need to select some vertices or polygons to edit them several times in different phases. So from this part you can save the selections you want to edit several times, and this way makes it easier to use them, which saves you time too. The next part is mirror. It gives you a symmetry of your shape. You can select mirror from this part and mirror your shape through any axis you want. And in offset part, you can determine its distance from the first shape or the copied one. You can also make an instance of it. Most of the times, instead of using mirror, we can use a very good modifier named symmetry. We will talk about it later. The next part is align. Look, the first part is align. Align helps us in placing our objects. For example, I want to place this shape exactly on the surface and in the center of this one. For this, you have to click on Align or press Ctrl+A. Mirror doesn't have a shortcut key, but you can assign a shortcut key to it from keyboard shortcut button. Here you can adjust the position through X, Y, or Z axis. Current object means the first object, and the target is the second shape. For example, now the center of the current object gets tangled to the center of the target one. Current and target. Now we press OK to apply it. In the next step, you can press Ctrl plus A again and click on the target object. Now you can place the lowest part of the current object. The current object is the first one which is selected, and the target object is the object we want to place the current object on it. We want to place it on the highest part of the target object. Now it's exactly on the center and also on the surface of the second shape. Let me do it on another shape. I select the sphere, press Ctrl plus A, then click on our target shape, select X, Y, Z positions, center. I apply it. Press Ctrl plus A again, select minimum and maximum, and just select the Z position. Now the sphere is exactly on the surface of the cylinder. Now let me do it once again. Alt plus A, click on target object. Now you can adjust any position you want. So the lowest part of the shape, center, pivot point actually is the gizmo. It adjusts the position of the shapes according to their pivot. Let me select them to see what happens. So the pivot is in the center. But if I change the position of the pivot, we will talk about this part later. For example, I move the pivot here. Now if I do the align again, let me change the pivot position of the first shape too. Affect pivot button adjusts the position of the pivot. Now I just want to tell you a little bit about this part and leave the rest for later. The default position of the pivot is different in different shapes. For some shapes it's on the center, and for some of them it may be on the beginning or end of the shape. You can adjust it manually. For example, I place it on the top of the shape. You have to turn it off in order to apply. And I place the pivot of this shape on the bottom of it. Now I press Alt plus A. The pivot of the current object gets placed on the pivot of the target object. But if you change the position of the pivot of this shape, for example, place it here, this part will be placed here in this part. It will be like this. Now I want to tell you about the align orientation. Here nothing happens. Now I create a shape, for example, a box. Now I incline it a bit. And now I want to place this sphere on it. I press Alt plus A and click on the slope. Now it happened because this part was activated. Let me do it with another shape. First, I deactivate the align orientation part. Now I press Alt plus A and click on this shape. As you can see, this happens. It's similar to the RCS part which we talked about last session. Now from this part it aligns it through the axis we want. And now it exactly lies on the slope surface. So this align orientation part is so useful, and you can use it to place different shapes on different surfaces. The next part in align is match scale. Now I want to show you an example to comprehend it better. For example, we have this shape here, which is bigger. Now we want to adjust this shape on this table we have here. And we want to make their sizes even. The height of this shape is more. And also its width. Now I want to make their sizes even. I press Alt plus A and click on the second shape. Now as you can see, we can match their scale through different axes. For example, in Z axis we can make their height even, or through Y axis. So now they exactly have the same sizes through Z and Y axis. If we go to top view, as you can see, they are exactly matched together. So we went through all the different parts in this window, and there isn't an untold parts left. Let's go to the next part. There's another important part under the align section, the normal align part. When you want to align the surfaces of two shapes together, you can use normal align. Now I select the shape I want and press Alt plus N. Then I click on its surface, and after that I click on the surface of the other shape. Again, I make a copy of this shape, press Alt plus N and click on its surface, and then I click on the other surface. Its usage is when, for example, you want to place a board on a wall. With this command you can easily do it, or you want to place a cup on a table. You just have to press Alt plus N and click on the bottom of the cup and then on the top surface of the table. As you see, normal align is different than align. Align adjusts the shapes, but normal align is for adjusting the surfaces, and you can use these parameters to flip it or move it through different axes. I told you about the necessary parts of align menu. You may sometimes need to use it in other parts too. For example, the camera part. For example, I have a camera here and I want to adjust it according to the place I click on. You just have to go through the align part and select the camera button and then click on the object. It adjusts the camera view according to the surface you select. So if I select the top surface of the shape, the camera view would be like this. The next part is align to view. By selecting the shape and clicking on align to view button, the shape will be aligned according to your view. And you can choose your required axis. So it's according to our view angle. Now if I change my view and click on align to view, it changes according to my new view angle. And again, you can choose the axis you want or flip it. So we talked about align part completely. It's our pro modeling learning package, so I try to talk about all the useful parts, even if you use them a little bit. The next important part that we can use is Toggle Layer Explorer. It's useful for crowded projects. In heavy projects, it's hard to control the scene because we have so many objects. With the help of this part, you can manage the heavy projects even with a weak computer or laptop. Unfortunately, most of the 3DSMAX artists don't use this part in their projects, but if you open the projects of famous companies, you would see that everything is in great orders and have layers with specified names. It helps a lot. For example, when you have a lot of trees in your project, you can put them into a layer and hide them while you are working on the project, and unhide them when you want to render. And you can do it for other objects too. The Scene Explorer part is almost the same as the layer part, with a little difference which is not important. Here we don't have layers. As you can see, their parameters are almost the same. But this one is based on layers and this one isn't. We usually use this one. For example, I want to create a new layer here and name it tree, and now we can add our objects in this layer by clicking on Add Object button. Or we can lock our layers or hide them, and etc. Now, if you render the scene, the deactivated parts won't appear. And if you freeze them, they will become like this, and you won't be able to select them. Now I activate them all. If I render, all of the objects will be shown. We have some other useful parts here which we will talk about them later. It's like select by name part. If you want to filter your selections, you can use this part. Another useful part here is the ribbon toolbar, which we have talked about it last session. It enables more complicated settings for our objects. I will talk about its different usages later. You can add it from this part too. The next part we want to talk about is Curve Editor. It's a very important and useful part. We will talk about this part more in another session. With the help of this part, we can control our objects more precisely, especially in animation projects. For example, you can consider different positions for your object in different frames. And you can do it through different axes. And by moving the frames, your object will move according to the positions you considered. And you can change the size of this part by pressing Ctrl plus Alt and holding the mouse scroll wheel. It's a little complicated. We will talk about it with an example in another session later. We will talk about its usage in making disorganized copies with scatter, but we don't want to go through it in early sessions. The next part is Schematic View. I explained this part a little so you could understand its usage. Its usage is for animation projects. For example, we have this figure here. It has some limitations for moving. For example, when I want to move this foot, I can do it just in a special area. I can't move it further than this. It's dependent to this one. And this dependence doesn't let it to change its condition. They're all dependent to another parts except the main part. We use a schematic part to organize these hierarchical orders. It's here as you see. For example, if I click on this part, it gets highlighted in this part. It's the subset of its upper part. And they're all dependent to another parts. And this one is the main part. As you can see, all the parts are dependent to this one, and this one is the main part. With the help of this part, you can control the movements of your personage for animation purposes. But we don't have enough time for explaining this part in this course. But I have a plan to prepare some animation courses which you can purchase after they're ready if you want. Or if you do a good job in your renderings, I will make free animation learning courses as a reward, which will be available in support group. Making animation projects in 3DSMAX is not hard. You can make professional animation or game projects with this software. But it's hard to do it by yourself. It's a teamwork. If you do it as a team, you can do a great job in this part. The next part is Material Editor with M shortcut key. We will talk about this part completely in another learning courses, Chrono and V-Ray learning courses. You can purchase them if you like. This learning course is just about modeling, and we don't have time to talk about these parts. In this part, you can assign materials to your objects. You can choose a standard or V-Ray for this part. The next part is render setup. In this part, you can apply changes to render settings according to the plugin you are using. And here you can render your scene. You can have the output of your project from this part. Or you can render an animation project. For this, you have to specify a range for it from here and with the help of this part. Now I want to talk about the two other methods of making copies of an object. We've already talked about the first method. You can easily make copies of your objects by holding the Shift key. But if you want to make more precise copies, you have to know the coordinates of the shape, the absolute and the offset coordinates. Now, as you see, the coordinates of the shape are shown here. You can make a copy of your shape from this part. Right click and clone. Or it's Ctrl+V shortcut key. Now you have a copy of your shape inside it. Now if I set this part on 75, their distance would be 75 from each other. And if I want to have another one with this distance from the second one, I have to set the Z coordinate on 150. And every time you have to count in order to set the absolute coordinate with the right amount. The absolute coordinate is the constant coordinate which everything locates according to it. Now if we want to work with an easier coordinate, we can use the offset coordinate. I press Ctrl plus V and make an instance of this shape. Now if I click on this part, I no longer need to add 75 to the current amount of Z coordinate. I just need to enter 75 in this part and repeat it this way. It's a good method, but it's not good that we have to make copies one by one. We can also use F12. Look, here we have the two different coordinates, the absolute coordinate and offset coordinates. For example, I want to rotate an object. I enter 90 in this part. As you see, it stays 90, but this part becomes 0. Now, if I enter 45 in the offset coordinate part, it would be like this. We have this for all three main commands, W, E, and R. Now, if I set this part on 50, it gets half of its size in all sides. It could be so useful when you want to be precise in your modeling. But definitely the best way for making copies is array command, which I want to talk about it now. Now I want to create the stairs with exact measures. First I create a chamfer box, and here I enter the dimensions I want. Now I go to a proper view. Under the Tools section, I select Array. I activate the preview. It shows us the preview of the changes we are making in the scene. Now we apply changes through the axis we want, X, Y, or Z. I press W. Now we want to make copies of this shape through X axis. We determine the number of copies we need in this part. Now we want to make copies of this stair through two axes. I want it to be precise. In this axis we need to move it about 30 centimeters, but because I want them to interfere with each other, I set it less. 28 would be proper. So I enter 28 in this part. By activating preview, the preview of changes would be shown. And I move it 18 centimeters through the axis. Sorry, I made a mistake. Let me set it on 0. The axes may be different according to viewport. For example, in this view, the height is through y-axis. I have to enter the number here. Now, if we go to perspective view, the height would be through z-axis. Be careful about it. Now, in this view, I adjust it. Here I can select copy or instance, and here we have the number of copies we want to make. And now with this method we have created our stairs very precisely. So this was the usage of array. With array command you could make copies with exact measures through several axes. I create another shape here. For example, we have an object here and we want to copy it through different axes. For example, we are modeling a gym and now we want to make several copies of a shelf. So, after you modeled the shelf completely, you can use array. I enable the preview and reset my previous changes Now I want to make 5 copies through x-axis, this way, with a small gap. Now for the second copy I select 2D, for example 3 copies through z-axis. And now you can make copies of all of them in the 3D part. So this way we could make a lot of copies of our object very easily and fast. Another thing that you have to know about array is the difference between its 2 different parts, incremental and totals. In incremental, every copy considers its previous copy. For example, for the stairs, when you enter 28 for x and 17 for z, it considers this distance according to its previous and next stair. But in totals, the distances between 2 copies don't matter. It just considers the distance between the first and the last, the lowest and the highest spot. Here you can adjust this distance. You just have to click on this arrow. Now it doesn't consider the distance between copies, it just considers the distance between the first and last spot. For example, you enter 700 for this part and you want 5 copies. It puts these 5 copies in a way that the distance between the first and the last one is 700 centimeters. For example, you have a 3 meters space which you want to put 5 shelves on it with even distances between each of them. But you don't know how much this distance would be. So you can use totals part and it arranges these 5 shelves with even distances in 3 meters space. So this was array part, which is so useful, and you will comprehend it better after watching the exercise video for this session. You have to practice and spend time. Please don't watch the exercise video first. You have to practice it yourself, and then you can watch it to see how I've done it, to see if you've chosen a proper approach for modeling the object or not. I hope it was a useful session for you. Goodbye till the next session.